it bums me out every time when you go to watch a movie and they feel like they have to explain away all the magic. Like it's so much more immersive to me to just have magic just be in the world, and you just accept, you get on, you buy the ticket, you just get on the train and you just go for it.
Hey, thanks for listening. Number 22 of Bruce Mao's Incomplete Manifesto of Growth states, make your own tools, hybridize your tools in order to build unique things. The entire manifesto was a tremendous influence when I read it in 2001, but 22 really hit home. My father was a third-generation inventor, and I grew up in his workshop. Tools of all shapes and sizes filled the shop, many from my great-grandfather, the original John Alexander. My father was a patient and generous teacher with ready answers for a child brimming with questions about the physical world. If you're interested in reading the complete Incomplete Manifesto of Growth, I've added the link in the show notes. It was in this workshop I first experienced the value of customizing and making tools. So when I began drawing comics for Marvel and DC, I sought tool-based lore from others, and whenever necessary, I solved my own studio needs, however possible. If you've ever drawn comics, you know it can be brutal on the body, especially the hands. During a period when I struggled with brush inking, I thought I could make the process more ergonomic, so I wrapped the brush ferrule with electrical tape until it reached a comfortable diameter. I think it was about a ½ inch. This immediately improved my technique, but I wondered if I could do more. And I was inspired by the illustrators and sign painters ball stick, so I designed a device where I could hold the brush perpendicular to the page and freely move along both the X and the Y axis. With the engineering and fabrication efforts of my father, we crafted what Howard Porter dubbed the Ink-O-Matic. Though the prototype wasn't exactly perfect, I could move the brush along in long arcs and lines. Throughout my years in the comic business, other custom tools dotted my studio. So when I moved from comics into graphic design, I was happy to find many of the traditional tools were the same. But this was the late 90s, and the digital age was upon us, and hand skills were on the decline. I learned the holy software trinity of Photoshop, Illustrator, and Quark. At first, it was scary to lose the obvious ability to customize these new tools, until I discovered keyboard shortcuts, brushes, patterns, and scripts. It seemed software developers and the graphic designers using the programs both shared Mr. Mao's philosophy. If you want the perfect example of someone making custom digital tools, my pal Kyle T. Webster made a career out of it and affected multiple industries. I encourage you to read his insightful Substack, The Accidental Expert. It's totally worth it, and the link is in the show notes. As I look back on my creative career and life, it feels as if I spent the first half building skills with external tools for the work I sought. Now, the second half seems to be about customizing my internal tools. I know this sounds woo-woo, but bear with me. What separates the best chess players isn't knowing all the moves, it's about how they think about and approach the game. I spent years in an exhaustive quest to hone the perfect technique. In retrospect, that may not have been the best use of my time. It was while teaching design and advertising when I first recognized this, and I shifted from being strictly a doer into a thinker. In order to teach the students, I had to transpose the instinctive creative problem-solving skills I gained in comics for use in their creative world. And in doing so, I discovered I had a process and that it applied to everything I did. I consider my process a framework, something I could adjust to suit the creative problem, be it design, comic books, or woodworking. It served me well as a designer and an art director. Unlike the visual world, the literary world felt devoid of physical tools. No longer was my creative feedback loop quick like drawing or coworkers and client feedback. Now everything was in my head and I couldn't see an entire novel at once, like my visual work. Without an existing process and tools, I wrote my first prose works as a discovery writer, finding my way through the story without much of a structure to build off of. I loved writing, but I rued the messy cleanup. Something needed to be put in place. So over the course of 3 novels, I've built and customized internal and external tools to help me write the stories. Just like I customized my Photoshop interface, done similar to my favorite writing program, Scrivener. I've also developed an outlining method based on how I used to write comics back in the 90s. To keep the ball rolling, I employ a handful of mindfulness practices that I've tweaked to serve my process. And to help with each book draft, I create a comprehensive revision guide to help me better see the story at a macro level. Finally, and most recently, I've returned to my first creative action, pen in hand. Now I print out drafts, make hand edits, and write story thoughts out on legal pads. Sometimes it's problem solving or scene drafts or character and world development, but I've found that the manual act activates the same region of my brain as when I draw. So new ideas, unburdened by grammar and scenic context, flow from my pen like sketches. There's no tool I won't adopt, build, customize, and or discard to improve my craft. I feel we should all open our toolboxes from time to time and examine them. Maybe just to see if something's rusty, missing, or needs some customizing to help us make the things we want. This week's guest is Jared Cullum. I stumbled onto his stuff, a couple of years ago on Twitter, and I was captivated by this guy's watercoloring. I got to peek at his work last year in person at Heroes, but he was super busy when I swung by. So I made it a point to talk with him this year. Boy, am I glad I did. He is unbelievably humble, but this guy is so passionate about painting and telling stories that he works ceaselessly to improve his craft. The work he does is gorgeous. I encourage you to find him in the show notes and check out his work if you're not familiar with it. He is so good. So I was thrilled to have him come onto the podcast, and I hope you can share in my excitement. So this is me with Jared Cullum. So last year was when I first, came across your work in person. I had already seen you on Twitter, and I came up to your table, and I'm like, oh, that's that guy's artwork. I've seen, because I was looking at Cody. I'm like, all right, cool. I'll go, and I walked up, and your artwork is, you stack up your pages. They're just stacked on top of each other. And and I'm like,
yeah.
I mean, ostensibly, not to blow smoke up your duty here, but I'm like, you're really effing good. And I'm going geez. He's just stacking this stuff up as, listen, I get it. It's work you're done. What are you going to do? Put it in a frame and hang it in your house?
Yeah. I don't know what to do with it. I never understand when people do prints. I'm like, where do you put it? Where do these things go? Because the pages and then plein air paintings just stack up, around the house. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I don't know what to do with this stuff.
Yeah. So I remember I was feeling like when I met, I just felt like, wow, okay, he really just cares about doing the thing. Mm-hmm. And the piece is done. It's okay. Sure. It's on to whatever the next thing is. And I thought that was a really interesting sort of way that, and that was my guessing, and I'm gathering that is actually kind of how you're sort of framing it.
Yeah. I definitely am a process over product in terms of creating stuff, making stuff. And mm-hmm. that's extended into both traditional painting life and in, comics work. So everything to
Mm-hmm.
me is like just part of the machine, like a, just producing stuff. So I've kind of felt the same way about, or I do feel the same way about plein air painting and traditional painting, that it's like I enjoy the process a lot, but once it's done, it's sort of, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you afford yourself any reflection on the work in a critical fashion, or are you taking in it as you do it? You go, I made that mistake, or do you go back and look at the pages and go like, okay, I need more underdrawing here, or whatever.
I think I do to an extent. I don't know though. It's hard. I mean, I do, especially because I'll do painting demonstrations for like YouTube where I'll rewatch it and I'll explain what I'm doing and explain the like color choices and that kind of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but honestly, I don't spend a whole lot of time looking back at things. I think because I'm so self-conscious. And so, uh, the gap between getting to like, uh, improvement feedback on my own stuff to just the abyss of self-hatred and wanting to burn it all
Sure.
in a fire. It's a pretty, I don't know, it's a pretty quick slippery slope. So I
Right.
don't spend a ton of time reflecting on the stuff I do, because once I've done it, I don't like to look at it again, because then I just the torrent of feeling guilty
All the
for
wrong.
doing any of it
Yeah.
anyways, and feeling bad about my skill level, or comparing myself to, everyone I perceive as better, rushes
Right.
in the uh when that dam looses, it's so strong, I have a hard time getting back out of it. So honestly, usually I just kind of keep whatever keeps the train. I lower the threshold hold to a point that I will move forward, and then I just stay
Mm-hmm.
at pace as long as possible without
Yeah.
looking back.
It's interesting. I mean, I think that's a really, you know, we could talk about the unhealthy aspect of the self,
Sure.
hatred aspect, but the healthy aspect is that you aren't focusing on all that stuff and you're moving forward. Like that was a big thing that, like, I picked up on, like, pros when I was kind of moving up into the business, and I'm like, oh, like they don't sit there and go, oh, I got to fix this, I got to fix that, and get really, really hung up on it. And when I transitioned over into writing stuff, and like in my writing group, there were people there who just don't get anything done. I'm like, why aren't
Mhm.
you getting anything written? And what happens is they write something and then they read it and they go, oh, it's not good, I got to rewrite this.
Mhm.
And I go, well, the difference between writing and drawing is, you can go back infinitely, because it's just erasing, a
Right. Sure.
line. And so, like, you have to kind of just accept that you're going to make a mistake, but do your absolute level best, and then just kind of clock it, like, okay, yeah, I think I really need to focus on how light bounces off of a shiny surface better,
Right.
and then do whatever, however you prep for that, whether that is work, observational, practice pieces, whatever the thing is, and then get back into it when you are doing the work.
Yeah. The progress is a bit like, you know, a documentary on climbing Everest, where there are just bodies lining the way up, and it's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people who get stuck on things, and redoing things. Or I'll do my graphic novel idea once I like have got to this level, or I feel like I've got to this whatever. There's a whole kind of you know Dante's Inferno level of, like a purgatory of people who
Mm.
have stunted themselves into not progressing forward. And I think I
Yeah.
fell I fell in a place where I could have. I What happened for me was I was doing heroes every year, and I was doing comic conventions, and then I would draw. And when I started drawing, it was a lot, because I'm not talented and I don't have any particular skill. So I've had to like put in the hours of just drawing to try to get to a level. And I think that's part of why I always have this fury of constantly drawing and painting, is because I always feel like if I let a day go by, I'm gonna slide back down and fall back
Yeah.
into where I was before. And so
Yeah,
I
I get
always
that.
have this like, oh, I'm constantly like white knuckling the paintbrush to feel like I have to hit a certain quantity of work. Um, but one of the things that changed my life was I went to CTN in Los Angeles, or in Burbank rather, and it was an animation conference, and it totally changed my life because there everyone is trying to get into the animation industry, and the quantity of work people were doing, I did not experience in coming up in indie comics. Not that it's like one is good or bad, but in indie comics, it was much more like I'm doing this thing that has meaning or whatever, autobio comic. I'm taking my time, and doing this thing where when I went over and met animators or people who aspired to like be a background painter, they were like getting up in the morning and going plein air painting on the way to a figure drawing session before they went to work, background
Right.
painting, and then plein air painting on the way home, and doing a late night figure. It was like just the work they were doing. And I remember seeing
Mm-hmm.
person after person with that level of like portfolio work mentality. And I remember thinking that if I'm gonna get somewhere where I have a book out eventually, I need to figure out a way to like become a machine and just produce and never slow down, because I don't feel like I don't feel like I have the luxury of talent of being able to like rest on my laurels of like some level of skill. I feel like I have
Mm-hmm.
to push for every little like nudge forward, on this sort of Sisyphus rock, to push up a hill. I feel like it doesn't come naturally or easily, so I feel like I have to put in that much extra work. Um,
So if you're bereft with this said talent, sir, why the hell did you even try to do this in the first place?
um, well, I didn't for a long time because I didn't have, there was a gap there. And like everyone I knew who loved me told me, that this is not for me. And, my like teachers and things like that. So I had quit for a long time, but I couldn't get over the fact that I did love drawing. And I
Mm-hmm.
came back to it. And a friend of mine, was honestly, what happened was a friend of mine gave me a copy of Blankets, and I had never read a comic like that before, because I had always
Right.
I didn't read a lot of actual comics when I was a kid. And then when I had got that copy, it totally blew my mind because I didn't even know that was possible. um
Mm-hmm.
and so I had decided I wanted to be an inker. um and I got really into drawing and inking. And I had never had any interest in painting, which is odd because that's the only thing I do now. Um, but I never had any interest in painting because I always thought it was like a stuffy kind of art schooly sort of thing. And I didn't have any specific interest in like fine art per se. So I wanted to, I thought, well, if I can't draw, then maybe I can get to a level where I can ink stuff. And so I practiced at that for a while, but I've always been very sloppy. And you know I think that's part of why watercolor, uh why I am so comfortable using watercolor and living in that world, is because you can lean on, you know the sloppiness, so to speak. And it's the you can lean into the chaos of it and try to draw some sort of order from the chaos, where I just have never had any kind of surgical precision with a brush or nib.
Mm-hmm.
It always has come out a little bit kind of wonky and chaotic. So, um, and I've still practiced. I don't use ink at all, but um, I still practice using it. I just eventually I came to watercolor, and I had gone to like a weekend workshop at a comics thing, and they had a French library, which I had also never seen before. And in their kind of French section, that like totally changed my life too, because I had not really encountered people like Mobius and Cyril Pedrosa and Joan Svar and Louis Trondheim, and I mean, the list goes on and on. And so when I saw their stuff, I kept seeing a couple of them were colored with watercolor, and I was like, man, I really want to do something like that, because I liked the kind of subtleness of it. It wasn't very insistent. Like Louis Trondheim's diary uh, books or whatever are very. It's not a very loud thing, and it doesn't insist on your attention. It's present, and you kind of meet it halfway. And there's something really interesting to me about that. So I got really into doing watercolor. I
Right.
got obsessed with watercolor and drawing too. And so drawing and watercolor just became like breathing or whatever. It was like just something that I have to do impulsively. And then all that other stuff is just sort of fuel in the tank. I don't know. I've never really figured out a way. I've been doing this it was always the dream to get a book out. And even after having a couple books out, I've never really outran the self-doubt or
Right.
the self-critical aspects of it, or the feeling like I don't belong in
Mhm.
either world, art or comics art or traditional painting. Um,
Right.
but it's still something that I compulsively need to do. And if I want to
Mhm.
get to, I don't think I'm ever going to be like like a sergeant or someone who's like, I don't know what you'd call it, an artist, I guess, with a capital A. But
Right.
I still compulsively need to do it. And then if I want to do
Mhm.
it at a level that I want to, it requires a certain amount of quantity of work.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the watercolor sort of suits this internal drive that you have, because of it's immediate.
Mm-hmm.
Out of all of the painting methods, it's immediate. Everything else takes this sort of time that you have to apply and reapply and work and do all these things to it
Yeah, it's true.
to get that finished thing. You can get it in watercolor in one shot.
Yeah,
Not to say that you don't go back in with things, but you can just nail it with one thing and you're like, I'm done, and off we go.
you're exactly
Which
right.
is, yeah. And I think so, if you are sort of suited to this ideal of like, oh, I need to get this idea out quickly, I need to push it. You can also, you can go in with some dark, solid, opaque watercolor, or some gouache or ink where you sort of wanted to. You could go over that. You can work it a little bit to kind of bolster up some sort of soft spots. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because having gone to art college, they make you do all the things you don't want to do. And they throw you in the, painting classes, and I'm like, ooh, it was
Mm-hmm.
like, so it was a whole battle of like trying to like figure that out. But then I took a watercoloring class, and it was like, oh, I can actually just paint a figure
Mm-hmm.
right here, right now, and be done. Like, it was a really, and having been exposed to, a painter like Sargent, who I do put on the top of the list of
Oh,
the
sure. In
the
history, yeah.
watercolor, masters, who can just, I don't think anybody's can capture light like he did.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think his ability to capture light was unparalleled. And there are so many great things. I've mentioned Anders Zorn to you, I think, in an
Mm-hmm.
email. And if you do want to go on a great vacation with your family, go to Sweden, go up and go visit Zorn's home.
I would
His
love to.
studio's there. It is unbelievable. The museum, it's all great. You can't
Yeah.
go wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would love to. Yeah, you're right. That's one of the most satisfying things about watercolor, I find, is you can ideally with watercolor too, if you're doing like landscape painting or plein air painting, in most cases, if you're painting it longer than an hour or 2 hours, then you're probably putting too much information in it anyways, which is something that I find really appealing about watercolor.
Yeah.
um the painting becomes more like poetry. I think it's like a haiku. You're not you have limitations when if you're thinking in that mindset, instead of having just
Yeah.
the three lines or whatever. I don't know why I made that analogy. I don't know enough about literature or poetry to pull this off, but instead of just the three lines or whatever, you have 3 stages of value or whatever. You know, you have
Yeah.
simple steps of value to go communicate an idea and try to transport a person to this feeling or this place immediately, rather than,
Yeah.
you know, like a full length novel or whatever.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, it really is it's an opportunity to push and pull.
Hmm.
And, and the pulling is only done by pushing, because
Hmm.
the paper is the paper. That's your white, and that's your highest value. So you have to kind of like know where you're going to kind of dance in there.
Yeah.
I think like, if I think like of a naturalist form, I think like Andrew Wyeth was so good at doing like a textured natural world with
Oh
his
my gosh.
watercolor
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it always just blew my mind when I would get, when I get exposed to his work, and I'm like, oh, I want to do that, because
Yeah. He really
yeah.
elevated watercolor. He was, I mean, one of the best in history also, just like Sargent.
Hmm.
Yeah. His, textural application, but also his just simple value, and then the subject matter too, just be, especially I'm in Pennsylvania, and like the
Hmm.
cold, and that kind of thing. He really
Yeah.
expressed it so well and so immediately, and in such a simple arrangement of values that kind of like,
Yeah.
base the idea is so strong. you know yeah, I love Andrew Wyatt's stuff. I got to go to his studio, or at least the museum there in Chatsford.
Yeah.
um so that place is remarkable. They had a lot of NC Wyeth stuff too. It was really cool.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, um, there was a museum tour that went around called like, maybe I'm going to butcher the title, but probably something terrible like Three Generations of Wyeths, something to that effect.
Oh wow.
And so it had NC, Andrew, Jamie, and
Jamie,
then
yeah.
Andrew's sister.
Yeah.
And to walk through those rooms and see this sort of connection between the family,
Right.
because there's something there. Like there is a way that they have generationally seen something
Hmm.
by exposure. It was mind blowing. I don't think there was a book. Come to think of it, I don't think they produced, or at least they didn't have it here in Asheville, which might be the case. Um,
They had a lot of their
so
stuff at.
okay,
Oh, sorry, I was gonna say they had a lot of
no, no, no,
all
no.
of
Go, please. I want to hear.
the dynasty of the family at Chadsford. They have a bunch of everybody's work you can see. So yeah, it's
If
remarkable.
I'm, if I'm, I think one of Andrew's brothers is the inventor of the plastic soda bottle.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like I read a book, and like I think he was the one who like, because it was a big family and they had these very sort of bombastic dinners, and
They
he
were like the
the
Tannenbaums. It was kind of interesting.
totally, oh my god, that's a great, yeah,
They
yeah.
the book, I read NC Wyeth's biography and I read Andrew Wyeth's biography, and
Hmm.
it was fascinating, and the way NC pushed them all so hard
Yes, yeah,
at
yeah.
whatever
He'd
they
probably be in trouble
music
today.
or
Yeah.
whatever, you know um yeah, it was, they're fascinating. They all were interesting,
Hmm.
each
So
member.
yeah, the brother said he said that at the table, like, you can make water freeze faster through, than normal, than just plain exposure to cold. And the father's like, no way. So the son put water in a metal spoon, and pressed it against, like into ice, like a chunk of ice. And that increased contact had it freeze quicker. And like, so the father was like, it shut NC up, and like, he's like, all right, well, that kid's the science kid, got him. Tick. All right. So
By the way,
were
thanks for
you,
having me on this show. I didn't get a chance to say it because I was talking about techie stuff, and I didn't get a chance to say thank you so much for having me, man. It's very nice of you. And I listened to the
oh,
show. I love your show, by the way. I listened to
oh,
Ethan
thank you.
Young and David Peterson, and your most recent one, which was really good. I thought it was really like the
Yeah.
discussion on AI stuff. It was neat.
Well, David's amazing.
I
And
love David.
great.
He is so
He gives
erudite,
great
and
tips for,
yeah,
yeah, he's so good. I mean, how he's carved his career, it's,
mhm.
it's wonderful.
Yeah. And he's just an all around nice guy. It's always a joy getting to chat with him at Heroes Con, because I don't usually get to see
Yeah.
him in other stuff. So I've gotten to talk to him more in the last couple of years.
we need to figure out how to get Ethan down to Heroes next year.
Yeah. Yeah, he's working in animation now, I think, right? I don't know him personally, but we've talked on Twitter.
Right.
And I've always
As
just
much of
loved
talking
his
that
work.
is.
He's just so
He
good. You know, he's every time he
he's
posts
so
something,
good.
he's like doesn't miss. So I've
No,
I've
no, no,
talked to
no.
him sometimes about just comics publishing stuff in general over Twitter and stuff. But he's
Yeah,
such a nice guy, and I just his work is amazing.
it is. His that short graphic novel Najing
Mm-hmm.
is so, it's so good. It's just, it's like it's a gut punch you want to get punched. You're like, all right, hit me. Like,
Yeah.
I want this. Yeah, he's great. All right, so I mean, I get the impetus to want to tell the stories, want to make the books. Like, I understand that. Anybody who's in it, I don't think, doesn't have that. Like, they go, I got to do this thing because it's this internal desire. But you were looking at, I guess, more traditionally initially, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
being, I guess, what you would consider what everyone else was doing. But what was the thing that tipped you off to say, well, I want to do more than just a black and white thing and then color it and then, on a
Yeah.
computer or something?
Um, I don't think I honestly had a an A to Z type or whatever plan initially, honestly. I think I just saw a thing I wanted to do, and I saw that it was on a level that I didn't think I would get to, but I was okay with that. So I at the time I get that friend who gave me blankets um was like, this was 2000 whatever 11, I guess. So everyone was doing web comics at the time. Everyone had an RSS
Mm.
feed. Everyone was doing web comics. And so it was actually her idea to do a like a web comic of like, okay, well, what you need is some kind of like goal of just like some reason to post something so that you're not just aimlessly coming up with ideas and not actually drawing. So I did, and also everybody was doing auto bio stuff, probably because of the blankets and other stuff. But everyone was doing auto bio stuff. At least that was a lot of stuff. So I thought, okay, I'll just do like an auto bio strip, and I started doing that. It was like 3 days a week, or it was 2 days a week, and then increased to 3 days a week. But it was a goal. It was like a goal and a reason to do it. And so I was pursuing that for a long time, and I would color it digitally, and I would ink, but I was trying to practice inking. So I'd do inking practice in between and anywhere I could find stuff, just library books and that sort of thing. And then just doing a ton of drawing, just drawing
Mm.
6-7 hours a day. Cause at the time I could not really draw people. So they were, it started out like borderline stick figures or kind of action figures. It was like a lump basically with a smiley face
Mm-hmm.
essentially. And, but all the while I was drawing maybe 6-7 hours a day doing drawing exercises. I had a friend that gave me who was an illustrator who gave me some exercises to like, okay, well, get a special sketch, for example, get a special sketchbook, draw in ink only, no pencils, and don't show anybody so that you don't have any kind of reason for it to look good. Make
Right.
ugly drawings, but draw everything, only draw from life. Get
Yeah.
involved in life drawing, that kind of thing. So I was drawing all the time, and I didn't even really know like what kind of stories I would want to tell, but I did really like. I became really into graphic novels, like the length and the fullness of the story. And yeah, I went to CTN, and I just decided that I wasn't going to get there at the pace I was going. I needed to like really get better or like, to get where I wanted to go with it. So I took some time to just go back to doing academic kind of drawing practice. Cause I didn't go to school for traditional art. I went to school for graphic design. And so I started doing online schools, basically subscription schools. Like at the time, New Masters Academy had like just come out, and schoolism was starting, but it hadn't like started up yet. So I was doing those schools and trying to just draw all the time. Got really involved in figure drawing, which was probably thing that made me improve the fastest was getting really into doing figure drawing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and I started doing short stories, and I couldn't think of story ideas, so I would do these little. Part of the problem I had was there was kind of a gap because I'm not very um I don't know how to say it without sounding like I'm insulting myself, but I'm not very good at like writing. I have a hard time seeing letters, and I'm not very good
Mm-hmm.
at like if I have to write any kind of book or anything and I have like just a blank Word document, I'll stare at it forever because I
Mm-hmm.
have a very hard time making the connection between words and then pictures, but I can see things very clearly in my head. So at the time I was trying to come up with story ideas, and I was just trying to do the kind of general writing exercises people will tell you, like get up and write for 15 minutes before you do anything else and stuff like that, come up with
Yeah.
what if story prompts and that kind of thing. But I was just hitting a wall every time and having a terrible time doing it until I started like storyboarding everything. And then I started actually getting traction. So I think for me, it was like getting to a place where, again, to me, it's always like figuring out the threshold I need to move forward and then just rocketing at that pace.
Mm-hmm.
um, so like I still have a hard time writing words. And so I storyboard everything, every note, everything. Um, I will storyboard it before I write letters. Um, so I started doing little storyboarded ideas of little mini stories, and I had always wanted to do like a full length story, but everywhere I turned, I kept feeling a little bit crippled by self doubt, and then also just the people in my life, apart from that friend and my wife, were telling me that this was a bad idea. So, like, there was a comic shop that I would go to, and I had finally come up with a little short idea I did, and I drew it out as like a comic, and I had it printed at a print shop, and I thought, oh, this maybe I'll bring this to Heroes, I could sell it for like $1 or whatever. um and I took it to a comic shop because I had known like a bunch of locals put their stuff up at this comic shop. So I went in,
Mm-hmm.
I talked to the guy, and he was just like ripped into me. It was just like,
Oh
this
no.
looks terrible. He was like, he told me I should quit, or at least I should write. I should consider writing and not drawing comics. That this should probably be the last thing I ever show
Oh,
anybody. And
Jesus.
he held it up. He went over to the wall and held it up next to the Green Lantern and was like, look at
Uh-huh.
this and look at what you did. Like I had like I was a dog that had an accident on the floor. It's just like,
Oh my God.
and yeah, so and then just in general, I just sort of hit a wall of rejection in general, trying to get into it. But um, I just kept going, and I kept wanting to do it. So I just kept producing, um, poor in craft, but mini comics nonetheless, and still doing the web comic for a couple years. And then I was doing these short stories, and eventually, um, I got into watercolor, and when I got into watercolor, I pretty much immediately became obsessed with, because I did one. I was doing. I started doing. I talked about loving Louis Trondheim. I started doing little. I did one about HeroesCon one year. But I was doing little journal comics, so I couldn't think of stories. So my go-to was like, well, I'll just do auto bio stuff. So I just like storyboard out some feelings about a thing, and then turn it into a little 22-page mini comic. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, well, this could be a good way to practice watercolor. And then I started doing like master studies. So I would go to the library and get like Andrew Wyeth or Eakins or Winslow Homer, and I would get the giant books, and I would
Mm-hmm.
just go copy them like credit card sized, and just copy every single painting and then put it back and then go get another one. I would just do that, um, a couple hours every day. And in between, also still doing the figure drawing and all the other stuff that I was doing, I still do to this day. But yeah, so I was just, sort of obsessed. I don't know. I don't have a great answer, and I'm not articulate enough to give you a
But
satisfying
you, I
answer.
mean,
And I feel like I've
you're
probably
being
put your people to sleep by now. Sorry.
no. I mean, I no, because I'm like totally riveted because I'm listening to this sort of autodidactic approach to it. Like, how are you going to find that thing that's going to answer this question? You're not frustrated and going, well, I guess I can't do that. Well, how do I get him? You discover watercolor, and it's hard. It's a very challenging medium because you have to accept that you're going to screw up, and
Hmm.
that's a tough thing for most people. Um, but you found improvement in figure drawing. Like you do that, and you're like, oh, I can see a marked improvement here. I'm structuring things out. Oh, I don't can't seem to write a story here, but I can storyboard a story, and then
Hmm.
I can sort of shape that into a comic book. I can then add dialogue to this still image, and so all those things, and you go, okay, well, I need to improve my how do I handle like lighting and tone in things. Okay, well, I'm going to go look at Homer. I'm going to look at all these painters and study what they're doing, and not and you're also doing it in a really analog fashion, which is fantastic because you're engaging with the stuff rather than just clicking through things where you don't have time to really absorb something. That book,
Yeah, I don't know if that's
you got to find the book.
generational or what.
I don't, I'm sure it's not entirely. I have a feeling there's probably plenty of people much younger who are chasing after this approach, um, but I think when you find the way that works for you, like, I mean, what you're saying is like, oh, I have to find that technique, that model that forces me to engage with this thing. So you have to kind of keep yourself in a relatively uncomfortable state
Hmm.
to kind of feel somewhat off balance, but that means you need to move. Because if
Yes.
you don't move, you're going to fall.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of been my, like I was saying, like finding the right threshold that I can actually move forward and then
Hmm.
go forward. And anything that sort of slowed me down or like, well, this is taking too much, then I pivot and try to just keep moving
Right.
as best I can, every day, essentially.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I went to school. He was years behind me, so I didn't have like the schooling time with him. But um, John Paul Leon, like that guy worked all day, all night. He was doing what you were talking about, these animators. I mean,
Hmm.
he was doing life drawing. He was doing, plein air drawing. He was out there doing this work to improve his craft at all times because like you're framing it like, oh, like I don't have the talent, so I'm gonna build my craft up to the point where I can do the thing that I want to do.
Hmm.
You know, I saw JP's drawings when he was 17 or 18 years old. He had the talent. He was ridiculously talented, but he never sat on that. He just kept pushing
Hmm.
to improve whatever skill sets that he wanted to improve. Um, so yeah, I believe me, that's not boring for anybody who wants to like engage in a craft,
Cool.
regardless whether it's drawing or not drawing or painting or whatever.
Yeah, I think if there's anything to talent, I heard someone quote the Atomic Habits book or whatever that was really popular, about how like essentially real talent is the your threshold for ability to put up with just the boredom of practice. Like it's not necessarily the natural gift of the thing. It's can you sit and draw, or in this case, or paint for 6-7 hours, and then do it again the
Mm-hmm.
next day and the next day and the next day, and just and put up with the boredom of
Yeah,
constant
because it is,
practice.
it's true. I mean, like it is absolute, like you can't do it with someone else around you often. So,
Hmm.
I mean, you could do figure drawing and with other people, but the work has to kind of be done by you.
Hmm.
And that's the thing. But yeah, I mean, that's so true. You have to be able to put up with that, whatever the thing is,
Yeah,
for
the
6, 7
isolation
hours
and the
at a pop.
boredom, yeah, of practice.
Dude, so the drawing classes and the painting classes in art college, like you're set 18 years old, off to art school you go, and they're like, it's 6 hours long.
Hmm.
And that was so terrifying because you're like, how can I get through 6 hours of doing this? And then by like a month or two in, you don't even know. Like you're so focused and into it. Boy,
Yeah.
those models. What a
Sure.
they had to be modeling for 6 hours straight.
It's hard. I
Oh my
used to
God.
teach figure, and I had a model not show up one time, and so I just did. I was like, I'll just do it because I'm not. It was like 30 people were all there, and the model texted me
Hmm.
like 15 minutes late and was like, "Oh, I'm not gonna make it." I was just like,
Yeah.
"Great," you know. And so I was like, "I'll just do it." So I just in my clothes just stood up on the stage, and I immediately was like shaking. I was like, "Oh
Yeah.
my God." I like got in one pose and like the like the intro session of just 1 minute poses, and it was like 45 seconds in, and I was like shaking. I was like, oh my God,
Totally.
how do you do this? So
This,
tired.
that's, that's what God invented stools.
Yeah. You gotta, yeah. I had one model, and when I was teaching that class, who passed out one time because they locked their legs on a long pose, and no one was paying attention, and then all of a sudden they just
Right.
fell off the
Oh my God.
stage. It was wild.
Jeez. So, so I mean, you're building. I mean, you're building the skill set up, and then like, but there is a goal. The goal is making a book. I mean, clearly, that's like you have this like I want to. I mean, obviously, Blank has left an impression,
Hmm.
and you're like, I want to make a book.
Yeah,
Um, when did you like feel you were, you know, did you feel you're ready? I mean, like, when did you say like, okay,
I
this is
think
the idea, and I'm going to chase it?
yeah, I think I might have waited for, we had our son was, uh, I knew I knew I wanted to eventually do longer books. Like that was eventually that became the goal. I mean, it was a lot of different goals trying to figure out what I wanted to do with it, mostly based on improving craft, just a vehicle for practice. But I knew I wanted to do a book. So I could not ever come up with an idea that like closed the gap of like, because I kept coming up with these little 22-page short stories, and I was doing these little 22-page short stories, just as minis to like take to Heroes or take to SPX and trade with people for fun, and but I knew like I had kind of pinned down like one thing I have always loved animation, and to be honest, I think probably it was more my first love because when I was a kid, my parents didn't. Um, I didn't have comics, and not until I was older I allowed to read comics. But we weren't like they when we were very young. They stuck to like religious content or whatever, and
Hmm.
so we weren't. I wasn't like very aware of pop culture stuff when I was very young. Um, so for me, my first love wasn't necessarily um, Spider-Man comics or Archie comics or
Yeah.
any kind of comics you would get, Donald Duck or whatever that you might want when you were a kid. Um, for me, it was like animation, like Disney animation from the 50s to the 70s, and then like Xerox era
Hmm.
Disney was my like deepest kind of love when I was a kid. I think it's because I've always been fascinated with drawing and loved drawing, and in those Xerox era Disney films like 101 Dalmatians, and Robin Hood, there
Yeah.
are those moments where like they didn't the cleanup didn't quite clean up, because they were not
Hmm.
inking it anymore. They were Xeroxing it really dark,
Yeah.
and cleanup wouldn't maybe erase all of Milk Call's understructure. So I remember
Hmm.
when I was a kid, we would watch Robin Hood or 101 Dalmatians, and I watched them obsessively. I could act out the whole movies just for fun because I had them all memorized. And I would always try to find the moments where just for like a one frame, it would flick Milk Call's structure for just like
Hmm.
a, millisecond or less. And I would try to pause it. And it was old VHSs, like rewind.
Right. So it's like a shimmering
Yeah.
thing.
And half of them, we didn't have, they were recorded from TV. So they were really like, not good, clear, clean reproductions of it or whatever. And so I would try to pause those movies and then like just stare because I just was so fascinated um, with that structure. And I wanted to draw like that, but I didn't really have the skill to. So I would do like stick figure comics essentially when I was a kid. I didn't really have
Hmm.
like a word for it, but it would just be like, oh, if you draw a couple things, it like animates kind of.
Hmm.
Um, so animation was sort of my first love, and then 80s Studio Ghibli films. So Totoro, in Kiki's Delivery Service. I saw, or I saw Kiki's was the first one I saw of the Ghibli films, and it like I loved it, and I didn't even have words for it. I just was obsessed with it. And I still think I have a cell in my studio from Kiki's Delivery Service, but I love Kiki's Delivery Service and Porco Rosso are like my favorite animated films, and they still stand out to me in my mind. And I would not say they're like the best in history, but they just speak to me, and
Mm-hmm.
I love their stylistic choices and realism choices. And so for me, I think what happened was I wanted to, it was like combining all my interests were all kind of coming together in that I wanted to do long stories because I wanted to be able to do a story like an animated film, so to speak, which I know some comics people hate when people compare comics to film or animation, but this is just where I came from.
Mm-hmm.
So I I wanted to do something long form, and I became obsessed with painting and especially people like Oga Katsuo, who does backgrounds for there. I mean, there's a ton, obviously, but Oga Katsuo did a lot of AD work on Ghibli films, so he's like a background artist for Ghibli, and I love his work. I love. I don't. You probably can't see it. Oh no, you can't. It's because I have a little like a book stand over here, and I have his
Okay.
art museum catalogs of his work open, so I can constantly see his stuff. I love Gakatsuo.
Keep the inspiration beaming on you.
Yeah, yeah. I love everything about his work, and what I wanted to do is I became fixated on painting in the middle 1800s to the late 1800s, so up
Mm-hmm.
to Sergeant Sorolla and all of them. That's like into the 1900s, Zorn and them, but also 1860s. So Manet,
Yep.
and that whole era leading up to Impressionism, particularly French art from that era, and then other like Sargent, I guess technically was American, but he was there um, later. So I became obsessed with that part of art history, and I think it's because that's when plein air painting really took hold. Like the 1840s, they invented metal tubes to carry paint. So it was like
Yep.
before that, they were carrying it in like pig's bladders and stuff to keep paint or clam shells and that kind of thing. And then now people were able to carry metal tubes out. And also science in general was just creating all these weird chemicals that produce different colors. So they had all more
Yeah, the
colors.
spectrum, like yeah, the German chemical manufacturing processes were taking off in the
Oh yeah.
mid to late 1800s,
Lots of
and they
terrible
were
chemicals, but
oh,
still.
yeah, but they were inventing blues that they couldn't have
Yeah,
before.
that's
Like it was
exactly what I mean. All the different kinds of
yeah,
crazy colors that started coming out. So
and then
they
they all went
started.
crazy, probably all the artists, because they were exposed to
Yeah,
these
well, there's
chemicals
that
they
too.
probably should never have been.
There's that too. But they became obsessed with light, leading into the
Mm-hmm.
Impressionist era of art, and then through Impressionism, Post Impressionism, light was the cornerstone, and then Sargent, of course, Sorolla, Zorn. Um, and then also the more illustrative people who were not illustrators, but they were in sort of in practice, like the Romantic or classical paint, like Jean Leon Jerome, painters like him who
Mm-hmm.
were fine art painters, but they were essentially illustrating narratives, and
Yeah, like Waterhouse, like
uh-huh
all those guys, very
yeah,
much they were. I
they were
mean,
telling
you
stories, I guess is what I'm
totally,
saying, and they were
yeah.
doing it with composition and color, and I got just absolutely fixated on it. So like I said, I was going to the library a lot, reading books on that part of history, and then copying all of their stuff. And it didn't really specifically occur to me until now. Obviously, in retrospect, I can put words to it, but at the time, I think what became the dream was, okay, if I can just immerse myself 10 hours a day instead of 7 hours a day in this part of art history where they became obsessed with light, if I can glean just like a fraction of that skill or mentality and then carry that over to my love of um, comics and
Mm-hmm.
storytelling, then maybe I can create something interesting. Maybe I can do something like Okakatsuo does with Ghibli, and of course how Miyazaki does with their stories, where they are telling such good stories through light composition and all that stuff.
Yeah.
apart from just dialogue and interesting stories. So, um, so that then became the fixation of like, how can I go back? I quit doing the web comic finally, the strips.
Okay.
I stopped doing strips. I stopped doing the other kinds of stuff I was doing and the journals. I was still doing journals on the side though, I guess. So, because it was just like a means to practice. So I was doing these little anthropomorphic animal journals to practice watercolor. I did one about SPX and one about Heroes Con and one about like being a dad, and like I did a bunch of different ones of just thoughts and feelings at the time. And but they were all like a vehicle to practice. And then it was like, okay, and I was doing, I don't know how many hours of just master studies and stuff of trying to learn how to um tell a story with light, just figure out how are they doing this, and
Mm-hmm.
then um I kept coming up with short story ideas, and I wanted to bridge the gap. And essentially what happened was I had three short story ideas, and one was um about like a down and out fisherman, and one was a kid's book idea I had about a bear that gets lost in a city. And it's like, he tries to do different things, but he can't because he's a bear. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a kid's book, so it's kind of silly. So like he tries to wait tables, but he can't hold. He keeps dropping everything, and he can't, everything he does he can't function. And then another one was about this, was a young woman who then eventually, when I ended up combining all three into one story, and thought if I had these three kind of stitched together, it would make one
Mm-hmm.
story about, instead of a grown like young 20s lady, it could be about an 11-year-old girl who is struggling to make friends and befriends this bear. And then she goes back home to the city, and it's this bear's journey to try to find her again, which I thought to me was kind of the metaphor of like I had done. I realize I'm on like 8 different rabbit holes here, I'm sorry, but
No, I'm with you. Keep
okay,
going.
I don't want to put you to sleep.
No.
But
I'm totally focused on this.
I had seen it as like, okay, so in my own life I had wanted art so bad and had befriended this big cuddly bear as a child through Disney animated films and through the things that I had loved, Kiki's, Ghibli films, before I knew what that was. um and then when I was about 16, everyone told me this is a bad idea, you should quit, and I did. And I
Mm.
kind of left it and tried to just become an adult, I guess, or whatever, and do something. And I ended up doing graphic design because I felt like it was at least
It's respectable.
adjacent. And yeah, and I've never had any other. I still don't have any other sort of marketable skill. I don't have any kind of. I can't like. I can't do math, and I can't hardly see letters, and I don't know what I would do. Um, so I, anyways, eventually that big cuddly bear, quote unquote, in the metaphor, um, kind of found its way back to me. So I thought, okay, well, this could be a story about that happening with this big bear. And then it's the children's book idea. He makes his way to the city, and then he finds his friend again. So, yeah, so that was the idea. And then I did a bunch of paintings for it and a bunch of stuff for it. And I pitched it to everybody, and unanimously everybody rejected it and told me it was not a good idea. So it was
Wait,
it was
before
a
we go deeper, what do you think? What do you think it was that elicited the rejections? Like, what do you think was missing?
I think part of it at the time was that I think I was well, I don't know. I mean, you never know, I think, when it comes to publishing, and I still don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I'm still get the same amount of rejections. That doesn't change. You know what I mean? You never know.
Yeah.
It's like it could be maybe they don't like animals, or maybe they want stories specifically to some market, or they don't think they could sell it, or whatever. I have no
Right.
idea.
Can we get tricycles in here? Tricycles are pretty
Yeah.
hot right now.
I mean, I don't know all the decisions because I'm not on that end, and I
Yeah.
don't have the kind of mind for it. I don't know how to make something that's like sellable, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I I just see the thing in my head and I like to draw it. That's the only thing I can do. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I was writing checks I didn't have the money for in the bank, so to speak, creatively. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if the dream was a couple miles ahead of where I was at the time, I think.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Just, but also it's just part of it. You never know. It's all, I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of rejection in general. So that's not like a, you know, a thing that's a testament to, I think everybody deals with it. If you're trying to do anything creative, remotely creative, you deal with a certain amount of rejection. It was not like rudeness. And honestly, a lot of it turned into actual work. So like a lot of my actual work came from the fact that they said they don't want, uh, that was Cody is what ended up being my first book. But, I had like an editor that said, we don't want it, but maybe this guy will. He said, we don't want it. Maybe I know somebody at Jim Henson, and they essentially, they like need kids art people. So he sent it to them and they were like, we also don't want it, but we need people for whatever. And I ended up getting to do stuff with them, and which turned into a nice long relationship I've had with them over doing, short comics and things like that. But that was my first like
Hmm.
professional, quote unquote, I guess you'd call it professional work, you know, outside of just making minis and trying to sell paintings.
Right.
Was
Right.
through rejection, came actual work. And then eventually, Top Shelf, they we ended up getting to talk, and they liked it, and I ended up working with Chris Staros and Top Shelf on Cody. So that was how Cody ended up coming about. Um, but yeah.
I think that's all right. It's amazing because I think the other thing that willingness to sit alone with yourself and do that work for 6, 7 hours at a time to sort of embrace the obsession. The other thing is the grit to keep going. That's a real tough thing. It's a hard thing to teach
Mhm.
with people because you can't.
It is
Not
really hard.
everyone
Yeah.
handles the sort of like, not today, kid.
Yeah.
They all, it's much easier to go like, well, screw it, I'll move on.
Hmm.
Um, that's a it's a big thing. It's like listening to you talk about this. And listen, I firmly believe, listen, comics, animation, television, they're all different. But there's so many, but storytelling principles are storytelling principles and they apply to all things. And
Hmm.
when I think about writing a story, especially for comic books, I like to think who I think like master story makers. And the master story makers of our time right now, I would say are like, or at least have been, Pixar. Like they
Hmm.
sit and they craft a story that has all these levels to it. And it comes together and it's tight. Ghibli does as well. And I think that's where like I go, okay, well, I can see how I want to bring that into the work that I make. I want people to come and get this and get a whole bunch of junk out of it, whatever it is. Not
Hmm.
just like, oh, this is fun and exciting. Oh, but it's also emotionally like resonating with me. And,
Hmm.
oh, there's a little bit of undercurrent here, which is a little unsettling. Like if you can get all these things together,
Hmm.
you get something solid. And like listening to you talk about it, like I'm like, oh, he's like kind of leaving the Xerox world of Disney, with like the Jungle Book, and he's got Baloo going into the city looking for Mowgli. This kind of like story is kind of like coming like together,
Hmm.
um, which is beautiful. Like it's your childhood kind of coming through into a story for you.
Yeah. That's kind of the goal, I think. I like thinking of writing that way, in a sense that it's like, Jaws isn't necessarily about the shark, so to speak, or, Jurassic Park isn't necessarily about dinosaurs or monsters or whatever. Like there's an actual human drama going on underneath
Mm-hmm.
the kind of maquettes of whatever is stepfather and kids or whatever in Jurassic Park, and um, the crew in Jaws or whatever. But I have always liked that as a way to think about story, something that connects everybody. Um, I like that about, and I think of it too, like, I'm sure you've read Stephen King's book on writing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's called On Writing or whatever.
Ding
And
ding.
it's, of course it's amazing, but he talks about writing. I think of, to build on what you said, I think I like the idea he talks about in that book about how writing is like solving a problem, like you're, you know, fixing a broken sink, and you have a toolbox and you open that toolbox, and your grammar and things are all just like tools in your toolbox that you can sharpen and
Mm-hmm.
develop over time, um, to better solve the problem. And I think of story that way too. So I think that's what appeals to me most about painting and storytelling, is that there's so much room there for storytelling tools. When you're thinking about lighting or weather, for example, those things have such a big impact on the way you experience a story. You know, morning
Mm-hmm.
light or sunset or a wash light, or, you know, torrential rain, that kind of thing. Each
Yeah,
one has a certain kind of emotional context, that you can use as a storytelling tool, you know.
totally. And like, you know, since you stepped into the Spielberg minefield, um, like that guy's the king of exactly what you're talking about here. When it comes to, I mean, he's got the best people, you know, shooting his films, but it's he is bringing the elements into that filmmaking, into that film. So, you know, okay, we're being chased by, you know, a giant dinosaur here, great, let's also have it downpouring. Like,
Right.
let's make it,
Exactly.
let's so all you can do is be overloaded by senses.
Hmm.
And he does, I mean, he does it with everything. I've mentioned it before, like even if it's like an ET, you're in the house, but he's put atmosphere into the air. There's so much smoke from the smoke machines just to give that room a sense of like thickness, and you know
Hmm.
that, and it's all for purpose. He's not doing it just because like, well, we've got these toys, let's use them.
Right.
It's all for effect.
Right.
And I think that's what you know, when you're a linear machine such as you are, you know, you're a vertically integrated organization here, and you have to utilize all those tools to extract every bit you can from that, you know, 3 inch by 5 inch panel.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I love thinking about that stuff. Like I said, I tend to think in storyboards, so that stuff, I spend a lot of time thinking about that kind of stuff, like visual
Mm-hmm.
texture, so to speak. And that's part of, like I said, why I love painting and and applying it, like you said, with the rain. It's makes it so much more immersive and so much more of a human story, because we know what it's like to be out in torrential rain or whatever, and the discomfort you might feel. And likewise too,
Yeah,
like with Ghibli, like they're the minor things they do are what make them such a major, you know, narrative success. It's the little things they do, like in in Spirited Away, when the girl is putting on her shoes, she takes like an
to
extra beat to tap her toe,
tap
you
her
know,
toes.
to get the shoe on. And it's like that little moment makes it feel so
Mm-hmm.
much more real. She could have just
my,
popped them
my,
on and took off.
oh my god,
They add that,
my
just that
wife and I
little
grabbed
extra.
each other's hands when
Yeah.
we were in the theater, like, oh,
Oh, I
like,
love it. I sit on the,
yeah,
like I've been going and watch. They've been doing Ghibli Fest and showing the movies in the theaters, and it's been so cool to see them big, you know.
yeah,
And yeah, oh gosh. And then of course food, you know, that's another thing Ghibli's known for, is just
sure.
every film has food, and it's so
Mud, they're good with mud too.
yeah, yeah. But their food, they spend so much time laboring over, the person chopping the thing and boiling and
Mm-hmm.
then eating the food and ripping the
Yeah,
bread, and then, you know, having a hard time delivering lines because they've got a cheek full of food, you know. It just adds such a visceral, you know, context to the story, you know,
I'm
that
so
feels
hungry
so
now.
human. Yeah, you know, they feel so much more alive. You relate so much more to it just because of that simple little thing, you know. I tried to,
Yeah.
you know, I guess you'd call it straight stealing, but I steal those ideas too for when I'm doing stories. I have food, I have water, or, you know, I
Yep.
feel like everyone has to have some textural aspect that they play with or don't, or choose not to, because of some sort of, um, you know, like in the one book I have, the Katya is afraid of water, so she doesn't like getting into water, and then the bear is afraid of lightning, and like they have things that they're afraid of because
Yep.
intentionally it makes you, uh, they feel like they have a lot more depth rather than just like, you know, splashing around. It's those little toe taps that
You
like
can use
develop
them.
much more. Yeah.
Yeah, like you can use, because like that toe tap thing is like every little kid has a little thing. They all
Hmm.
do. We all had them as a kid, and we do them. And
Sure.
it's not an OCD thing. It's just these little things that we do that reassure us in one way or the other.
Hmm.
And but you put all these things, but then like you say, okay, if you're afraid of lightning, like that's Chekhov's gun. You know,
Hmm.
like you're going to use that later
Right.
on, and it's going to become a significant portion.
Oh yeah.
You know, like, oh,
It's a
thunderstorm
hurdle or
happens.
a hill to climb, to get over, a dragon to face or
Absolutely.
whatever.
Right, because you know, the try fail cycle. Okay, cool. Like our
Right.
characters, you know, like, oh, like, well, we got to go over there. Like, well, a thunderstorm happens. Like, well, let's just wait for the thunderstorm to pass and then we'll get over there. Oh, okay, great, fine.
Right.
But okay, we've seen the failure. You know, oh, we missed the train or whatever the thing is. And
Hmm.
then when it becomes a matter of, you know, let's say life and death, and the thunderstorm happens, like then the character has to go past that, and then we all feel like, okay, they've succeeded.
Right.
We're better off for it. And when
Right.
you're talking
There's
about,
growth.
yeah, it like, you know, to quote Bono, to assuage your guilt, like every poet is a criminal and every artist is a thief. Like it's
Yeah.
the norm. It's, you have to be, because if you're not, you're just in a vacuum.
Right.
Yeah, I we saw a movie the other night. It's called Perfect Days. It's
I
a
haven't
Wim
heard it.
Wenders film.
I haven't heard of
And
that one.
oh, rent it. It is so
Sure.
good. I guess when I say rent it, is whatever you stream it.
I
It
know what you
is
mean.
so good. It takes place in Japan. It's all in Japanese. Wim Wenders is a German director. There's no story. There's no plot, so to speak. It's
Hmm.
all character driven, and it is beautiful on every level. It's so inspirational. If you've seen the movie Patterson, it seems to be a cousin of creation in some
Hmm.
weird way. So I don't know. Can't recommend it enough.
That's what was it called again?
I think Perfect Days.
I have to look it up. I
Yeah,
definitely will.
it's
I love that kind of
it is.
stuff. I
Oh
that
yeah.
stuff always like. I mean, I like, so a lot of even my favorite kids books and things are often things that are not narrative driven specifically, even though like I've spent a lot of time trying to study just to improve writing, for example. Like the
Hmm.
amount of times I've read Hero with a Thousand Faces or whatever, or some explanation of Joseph Campbell's,
Right.
description of the circle and the holy circle, and trying to apply that on different levels to specific characters or whole scenarios or whatever. Dan Harmon's adaptations to the circle, all these different like
Yep.
ideas that have spun off of those things. The things that speak to me the most are like my favorite kids book illustrator is Gabrielle Vincent, who did Ernest and Celestine, which is she's Belgium, and her books are very popular in France and Europe, and they made an animated film of it in France, Ernest and Celestine. It was good.
Hmm.
They sort of did the thing where they apply more story to it, which is fine,
Hmm.
super cute. But what I love the most about the kids book specifically, they're also in watercolor, I should say. Um, Soft, subtle watercolor characters. It's about a bear and a mouse that live together, and like nothing happens, and I just adore it. They
Yeah.
go to the art museum. There's like a moment where Ernest can't find Celestine. It's like one page, and that's the conflict essentially. Other than that, it's just two friends that like, there's one of my favorite ones is they don't know what to do because it's a rainy day. So they decide to just go out. They were going to have a picnic, sorry, but it's a rainy day. And then they decide to just go have a picnic in the rain. And that's it. There's no, but it's just
Yeah.
these soft, beautiful, immersive illustrations where, of just two friends. Frog and Toad is similar, although there's sort of a
Yeah.
drive to those. But there's something so magic to me about
Hmm.
um, I have the collected Frog and Toad above my desk and all the Ernest and Celestines because I love them, because they're so subtle in the illustration and in the tone, and also in just the lack of, you know it's not like Frog and Toad go outdoors and then there's a lawnmower and then it's like there's no mounting enemy or like greater villain or something
Right.
that's like rising that they have to, somehow overcome. They just exist. One is kind of moody, the other one is eccentric and extroverted, and they just sort of exist,
Yeah.
and it's magical. It makes me, oh, I love it. There's one story where nothing happens because basically Toad goes to find Frog, and Frog is off on a hill by himself, and the whole story is just Toad can't find his friend, so he's going around looking for him. Nothing happens, and then
Yeah.
he brought him he made sandwiches he wanted to bring to his friend or whatever. And then when he finally friends him, his friend, the Frog, is just like, "Oh yeah, I just wanted some alone time." And then they just sit, and he's like, "Well, I brought sandwiches, but now they're all wet." And he's like, "Oh, we'll eat
Oh,
wet sandwiches," and they just sit and eat wet sandwiches. So there's no like crane that swoops in and they have to
right. There's no plot device.
yeah, there's no major thing. It's just this, they just exist, and I love that about those stories. I just love it so much.
Yeah, I think they lost their way with Frog and Toad Save the World. That was
I did. I know they did an animated series, and I was gonna say I don't know what they did there, but the original,
yeah.
the original, I don't know what they did with the animation. Maybe the animated is just the thing. I didn't know if you were referring to that. I was like, I don't know
No,
what they did there,
I'm
because
just
that's the thing that always makes me sad is when they take these magic stories and then they try to
Mhm.
explain it. Like they can never just have like a magic thing be a
Yeah.
magic thing, and it just bums me out every time. Because I have kids, and I we watch whatever pops up that they can watch. So it'll be like Clifford, but it can't just be Clifford anymore. There has to
Hmm.
be, there's this ominous science lab that has, and he's
Right.
an incidental. It's in the kid's book. She just gets this dog that won't stop growing. So they leave the city. There's not really this greater ominous science, and I know they have to do that to like make a film, I guess, or whatever, but like it bums me out every time when you go
Yeah,
to watch a movie and they feel like they have to explain away all the magic. Like it's so much more immersive to me to just have magic just be in the world, and you just accept, you get on, you buy the ticket, you just get on the train and you just go for
I
it. Like,
agree. It's like the necessity of putting an origin story in a superhero movie. Like
yeah,
like we're all going to be on board that Superman can fly. Let's all go with that. We're all here. No one's here expecting this to be out of Africa. Like we're
right,
not going to be. You're not tricking us. Like
yeah.
this is as
The
advertised. So
potency of that magic, it's in the
yeah,
magic trick of you're
yeah,
given A and C and your brain makes B. It just, you accept the ride. It's like the intensity of Alien or the intensity of Jaws, to make a huge leap, is that they weren't just created in a lab. It's just, there's this thing,
sure,
it's just there. It's just
yep,
unimaginably huge, that works on a metaphorical level too. There's this problem that's just unfathomably huge and will chase you no matter where you go. It's
right,
big, and that idea is so much more immersive and works so much more as a metaphor if you don't have to go, okay, well, there's this tech lab and they spilled a thing and now there's a mega shark or whatever. It's like,
right,
I like that in Jaws, much like whatever, maybe it's, I don't know, hereditary alcoholism or whatever. There's this big honking problem that it will
mm-hmm.
never, you can move to Europe and move to a little village and it's still there, it's still coming, like I like that
Yeah,
there's this that works so much more immersively to me than having to explain away the magic and the
no,
whimsy. I
totally.
like whimsy is my home base. I think that's why I like Ghibli movies so much, is they don't you know it's just the whimsy, it's just there, like Totoro, it's just there. There's no
Right, and
there's no reason, there's a cat bus, there's no
yeah,
explanation, there's
the
no
fantasy's part of it. Like it's
yeah.
there, but all those things that you're talking about, like with Frog and Toad or any of this, or Ernest and Celestine, like these are human moments. What they're doing, they're we don't there is no plot in our day. There's no sort of the closest we get to plot is when there's a project for
Hmm.
work. Like we got to get this done by this time.
Right.
Okay, there's our MacGuffin. Okay, we got to get this
Sure.
done. But like, but life isn't that. Life is all these stacked up human moments. So and Ponyo, like just Ponyo loves ham. Okay,
Right.
like that's sweet and fun. That's all I need. I
Yeah.
don't need, that's going to bond me with these characters.
Right.
So it's our job to put those characters and all that into our own work, so people
Yeah.
can. I mean, that really what it is you know technique and um, polish is fantastic, but if you can connect this deep, like, and I'm not dissing him at all, but like um, Noah Van Sciver's Maple Terrace. I don't know if you've read any of those
I'm not
books.
familiar with his stuff. I've
So
I've heard people
he was
mention the name. I'm just not.
yeah he
I
was
haven't seen his
yeah he
stuff
was
before.
there. I think he's like, he may have very well been like on the other side of your block.
Oh, that's so
Um,
funny.
and but he's so like, I mean, he's doing this comic book series, and it's just him as like a 10-year-old kid and the horrors of being a 10-year-old kid, and it's all human, like in
Sure.
the stresses that life growing up in, applies to a little child's brain, especially, in an unsupervised fashion.
Sure.
It gets pretty exciting and terrifying. But yeah, that's the thing. Like, it's not about like how amazing you can make that drawing. It's about how amazing you can make the character, and then the drawing is just icing on that cake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I agree.
So you mentioned earlier something, and I just want to tie it in because it's I'm looking at the work, and all I just kept getting was this hit of impressionism in your backgrounds. I'm like, oh my
Sure.
God, like he's like, and then you're like, oh well, that's where I'm focusing my, I'm like, well, of course, like that makes
Yeah.
all the sense in the world, and how that looseness plays so well against the subject
Yeah.
in in the panels or on the page. It's very
I think
it's
that juxtaposition also comes from my fascination with animation, to be honest, is just trying
yeah.
to replicate the sense of a painted background and a cell stuck on top of it. Because I
Mm,
don't really explicitly intend that to be the case. But
mm-hmm.
if the net result is, I think if I have to like pair the goal of what I want it to look like to something, essentially the idea is taking from people like Sargent, who would focus his brushstrokes and like contrast elements of contrast on the object of interest. Most like a lot of what he did was portraits, so like the eyes or whatever would be very detailed and high contrast. But then as you move away, the strokes would become much more thick and broad and abstract. Mary Cassatt did that a lot too. I mean, a lot of people did. But the idea of having an object of focus and interest and allowing the rest to sort of desaturate and let the values become less explicit. And then that tied to, of course, like I was talking about, animated films like, Robin Hood and um, Jungle Book, how you have the cell of the character that is inked and colored, and
Mm-hmm.
then they're sitting on just a stunning background that
Yeah.
works on its own, like with no cell applied. And of course, like I said, I'm obsessed with Oka Katsuo um, and the background painters for Ghibli because of that reason. Every background is like just a high quality, functioning, well lit, beautiful gallery grade painting done with poster paints, 4 or 5 a day at a super, ungodly rate. And then also for me too, a big change was reading the making of Totoro. And in Totoro, they decided to, this like changed my life too, was because I used to ink everything. So I would draw everything, paint everything, and then ink the thing that was most interesting. So like Cody, my book Cody 1 was done that way, where I would paint the background and the character, and then I would ink the character with a
Right.
brush pen. And then I read the Totoro making of Totoro, and in that they talk about how they made the specific choice because stuff like Disney was using black outline everything, that they switched to brown to outline everything. And I had always felt like there's just something about Totoro that feels so alive and feels so
Mm-hmm.
warm. And apart from just the tons of examples of the minor moment animation I was talking about with the characters, and the subtlety of the character choices, the way they run through the house, the one little girl
Mm-hmm.
and the other little girl, how they're in the scene where they go to open all the doors in the house, and how one of them is just like a wrecking ball and the other one is jogging. Like those
Yeah.
little character choices are so true. I have two kids and they are just like that, where one is like a wrecking ball and the other one is much more thoughtful about the way they move through environments. Choices like that, and then the application of a warm brown ink as opposed to a black ink is
Yeah.
so just so I quit using ink altogether, and now I just use watercolor for everything. So the last
Yeah.
stages of a drawing, when I do the quote unquote inking part, I just use watercolor straight from the tube. I use ultramarine and burnt umber, which are
Okay.
it's a dark orange and a dark blue, and when you put them together 50-50, it makes black. So I'll do that, and then I'll make it 60-40. So if it's like a jacket, I'll do blue, so it's bluish dark, and then if
Mm-hmm.
it's flesh tone, I'll go brown, like more burnt umber, 60-40 split between the two.
I
Or
love
use
that.
Indian red in the mix too, which is like a dark red.
Mm-hmm.
So what I am now in like Cody 2, I'm working on Cody 2 right now. So like the flesh tones, for example, all the skin is all inked quote unquote with red, dark red, and then the
Mm-hmm.
jackets or things are either brown or blue or whatever. And so there's a lot of color variation in the ink, but it makes for much more, I feel like, a much more immersive, it blends with the painting more rather than looking like it's a sticker sticking on top.
No, it makes complete sense. And if you think like on a graphic design level, like it's like very smart because you're just utilizing like the containment line is the containment line. So now you're
Mm-hmm.
changing the context of the containment line to actually have more like a secondary purpose on
Mm-hmm.
top of just covering over a meeting of two different colors.
Yeah.
That's really it's well, good on Miyazaki for coming up with that one.
Yeah. And I think people kind of like with Miyazaki, where it's like, it didn't even occur to me. It just, I don't know why. I just felt like it
For
was
sure.
felt more warm and more real. And then after they said that, I caught it. I was like, oh yeah. And so I think to me, like for Cody 2, for example, I don't think it's anything people reading it would necessarily jump out to them, but I think it is something that you do feel.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a beautiful touch and a great way. Another good thing to steal. Steal
Yeah.
away. Just steal it all. So okay, Cody 2, so what's the timeline for that? Is it still with Top Shelf or is it with a
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
publisher? Okay.
It's still Top Shelf. And I have another project with Top Shelf, which I can talk about a little bit of, but I haven't gotten far enough in to like announce it yet or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm super excited to work with them again. They're just great. They've been so kind to me and fun to work with. But the Cody 2, I am halfway through painting. So I've been basically, the way I work is I have to storyboard because I have a hard time writing out the words. So I storyboard the whole thing out and then convert that into layouts and turn those in. I have it all
Mm-hmm.
laid out and I have it all drawn, and I am halfway through painting it now. So I'm hoping, I really want to be done by the end of summer with it because I want to move on to this next book I'm really excited about. But I'm hoping to be done either by October or December if I can, and then I don't know what their timeline is for release in terms of their
Mm-hmm.
plans. But that's at least when I've hoped to be done with the putting it together. So, and then I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got another idea I'm doing with them, which I'm super excited about. And then I have written out an outline of ideas for a potential Cody 3 and a sequel to this other book too. This other book was that's more they're doing because they were smarter about it, because I had a lot of ideas and I put them all together, and Lee, the editor, was like, maybe this is a book. And you know
Mm-hmm.
you've got all this other stuff, like maybe we can use that, maybe either we don't need it or maybe it's something for the future. So um so I have a bunch of ideas for those, and then I have a couple other kind of graphic novel ideas I've had on the side as well. So I've
Yeah.
got which I don't have a home for, but I want to finish what I'm doing now before I can take on anything else big.
It's it's such a labor, man, because you're doing all of it. Like it's such a labor. I
It
you know,
is.
I mean, listen, I never painted a comic book page. So I mean, I don't count anything I did in arts college as actually doing a painted comic page. So, but for the work that you put in as a comic book artist on regular old black and white artwork, it's ridiculous. What you're doing, it's a very different world.
It is very different. I will say though that I have done a lot of it, and I still do a lot of it. I still do general exercises and practice figure drawing, plein air painting, and whatever. So because of that, I am faster at it. So I
Mhm.
think it would, honestly, at this point, it would take me longer to do a digital book probably, because
Yeah.
I've just gotten much faster at correcting, fixing, or painting opaquely than I would be if I sat with the clone stamp tool or whatever, tried to, like
Yeah. I mean,
fudge or
as
even color digitally.
sure, as wonderful as Kyle's, watercolor brushes are,
Sure.
on Photoshop, it's still not watercolor. Like there,
Yeah.
it's a great simulacrum, but it is not the same thing.
Yeah. I think I
Why?
need it too. I enjoy like I said, I'm a process over the product. I liked the process of doing it. I
Uh-huh.
uh I like the feeling and the idea of pushing the stuff around on paper. Not to be all like woo woo about it or whatever, but I like I think people would honestly have less respect for me if if they knew how much of my backgrounds rely on like basically finger painting like a 4-year old, and using my hand and tilting it and spraying it with water to get like different rain or lighting effects and stuff like that. But I like the idea of smearing it
Yeah.
Liz, literally and physically with my hand and pushing it around. And uh, I think it's fun. Also, just like on a overshare level, I don't really get how digital people make it in this industry, to be honest, because
Mm,
I kind of like, I rely on that stack at Heroes you were talking about,
yeah.
because it's
Right.
like the book contract's great, and I would never complain. They're fine. They've treated me very well. At my publishers and editors have all treated me very well, but um, you know, it really helps having something on the table that people can then buy. If I was
Hmm.
doing it digitally, I guess you do prints. I don't really even know. I've never even done anything digitally. So I've done everything traditionally, but
Yeah.
I have stacks. I mean, that was one book that you saw at Heroes Con.
No.
I have like 4 of those stacks, you know what I mean? Between
Yeah.
Cody one and then Firefly and Planet of the Apes and the other stuff I've done. It's just
Hmm.
Fraggle Rock and Labyrinth and all this other stuff. I have stacks of these pages that um, end up being, you know, like a decent part of the making a living. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's like a nice side, at least help, you know what I mean? Because if I was relying on digital stuff and only the book contracts for over
Yeah.
years, of course, it would be hard, I think.
Yeah. No, it would be. I mean, I think the model has settled on the you draw digitally and then you ink traditionally. So that
Hmm.
way you have something finished that you
Yeah,
can then sell because
it's
listen,
nice to have something to sell.
of course, and listen, as fans who like to collect artwork, it's nice to be able to get something because
Yeah.
without that, I don't know. I mean, I'm not knocking anybody who does their work all digitally because God bless you for doing it. Um, I get it. It's a tool and it makes complete sense on a production level, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I get it.
I have,
Uh,
I love original art too. I have art that I would basically be buried in I love it.
right.
And I mean, from people who I've had great respect for, that I love having something physical that they've done, some,
Hmm.
tangible. And then it's nice
Yeah,
too, because I do a lot of plein air painting, outdoor painting, and still life painting. And so I have like a corner of my table always for the bored dads or spouses who are not into comics, very obviously not into comics, and they'll see my table
Sure.
and go, "Oh, it's like flowers or like
The
a
art
snowy
gift.
landscape." It's like a little
Damn it,
moment
you know,
that's
it's
not
our
comics related, but it's
it's
art
our
adjacent.
anniversary next
Yeah,
week.
exactly. I get a lot of that. People who come up and
Right.
be like, "My wife doesn't like comics, but here's something I can get."
Oh
Just
my
like
gosh,
a
yeah.
painting of some horses in a field or whatever.
Right.
So
Hey, I've been to that diner in Red Hook.
there's a lot of that too. Yeah, I get a lot of that too,
Yeah.
where people know a place or whatever, and yeah, it's so funny.
Yeah. If you get it, I mean, it makes complete sense. And you know, and if you could turn just basically, like, imagine if you could turn your workout into a way to make money.
Hmm.
That's what you're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah. It occurred to me. It was something Ed Piskor said one time. He was talking about doing figuring out a way to improve yourself but also get paid for it. It's like the best. That's where you can really, blossom.
I totally. I think, yeah, Ben Caldwell is like that. I mean, the guy does all his comic page drawings on copy paper, and then he light boxes everything onto the page, and then he just sells. Like, he'll throw up like 5 or 6 of them on, Twitter or whatever, and he's like, and then he's like, sold, 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 and I'm like, all right, well, he just paid
Yeah,
his mortgage.
sure. It
Yeah,
helps. It
it's
helps.
super smart. It's super smart. Well, my friend, the time kind of flew by.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
This was really fun.
yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Some people, like, I build people up in my head that I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to really kind of do a song and dance and convince them to come on to the show. And I walk up, I'm like, all right, right, right. Like, I'm all focused. And you're like, yeah, sure, I'll come on. I'm like,
Yeah, man. I just love talking about this stuff.
yeah, no.
I hope I wish I was more articulate. I'm not as erudite as David and Ethan, but
He draws little mice. He's not smart. Don't trust me. He's not that smart.
hopefully people are still awake at least. So.
I'm absolutely sure that they are. So I guess you are doing any other conventions where people could find you this year, or
I'm gonna do Granite City instead of SPX this year because they're just so close to each other. It's too hard with two young kids. It's just too hard to travel. I have to kind of pick my spots, and then I'm probably doing Lightbox in Pasadena.
Okay.
I'm trying to pump the brakes at the moment until Cody 2 is done, because I'm at the point now where I'm getting a little tired of everyone coming up and saying like, how's 2? I'm like, that's all, I'm getting there, so I would like to be able to go, hey, it's done, so
It's done.
I'm hoping, that's why I'm like, a goal is into summer, October, then hopefully Lightbox or whatever, if someone asks me, I can say it's done and it is coming out. So
Well, I encourage you to get it done. And then next year, you can have stacks of those pages, and then you have stacks of printed copies of Cody 2. I mean, you'll need 2 tables. You'll need more tables.
That'd be the dream.
Yeah, living the big double table dream.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you so much for having me on, man.